Thank you so much for joining this webinar. My name is Kate, and I am the Interfaith Coordinator for Islamic Networks Group, which is an organization in the Bay Area. We have been around for 24 years now, and we fight bigotry and discrimination against different religious traditions through education and interfaith engagement. And a part of this effort is through the Know Your Neighbor Multi-Faith Encounters Coalition, which launched at the White House in 2015 and includes over 40 interfaith organizations. And our goal is to help promote different interfaith resources and to help collaborate within the interfaith world. So this webinar is a part of a series of webinars sharing different resources and ideas within this network. And so today we have representatives of some really prominent interfaith organizations. We have Megan representing Interfaith Youth Corps, Skylar representing Spokane Interfaith Council, and I believe she just signed on, Sari representing United Religions Initiative. That was perfect timing. So I'm just going to give our panelists an opportunity to answer some questions about interfaith engagement. And I'm going to begin with Skylar. So Skylar, I would like to ask you what interfaith engagement means to you and your organization.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, and thank you for everybody for joining in. I think this is a really wonderful opportunity and very timely, honestly. For myself, when it comes to interfaith engagement, as well as the Spokane Interfaith Council and Spokane Faith and Values, we really see this as a great starter for encountering one another and our neighbors to build community, to make our community a better place. We feel that with so many derisive topics that are going on, whether they're national or local, we find the best way of addressing some of these issues is to find common ground. And oftentimes that's through things that are really important. So for me, when I want to know someone, when I want to get to know someone better, I want to know what informs their actions and what gets them up in the morning. And oftentimes that's people's faith or what they believe in terms of building a better community. And so it's a really great way to connect. And that kind of informs all of the programming that we do here in Spokane, Washington.
Megan, can you talk about what interfaith means to you and Interfaith Youth Corps?
Sure. So at Interfaith Youth Corps, we focus our interfaith cooperation efforts within the realm of higher education, specifically colleges and universities. So I have been on staff for about 5 years now, and I work primarily with campus professionals who are not necessarily teaching faculty. So that's everybody from religious life to student affairs and supporters, basically the people who are working directly with students within their particular sphere of influence. So Interfaith Youth Corps is, I think, a little over 15 years old now. We've focused our efforts on higher education for a little over 5 years. And our focus is really about helping students within the educational context encounter difference in a constructive way and within an atmosphere that allows them to mess up, essentially, and to be challenged to think about things in more nuanced ways, but most importantly to empower and to encourage them to build relationships. Our methodology across the board is very much focused on relationship building. So that's kind of IFYC. And then for me, I'm personally interested in interfaith as somebody who, one, studied religion for a very long time and just generally fascinated with religion and how it has influenced the human experience overall. And also personally as somebody who is very committed to a secular identity. I'm a humanist and an atheist. I really feel like secular folks need to be in very healthy and appreciative encounters and relationships with religious people. Often the story you hear is, the angry atheist in the corner who wants to, judge people of faith. And I am here to tell you that we are not all of that particular stereotype. So on the personal level, it's really important for me to be in conversations and to be an example of one of those secular folks who wants to be at the table.
Thank you, Megan. Sorry, was having some trouble joining the webinar. Are you able to hear me?
I am here, thanks. Just without a webcam, sorry, y'all.
Oh no, we actually have you on webcam, but it's the top of your head right now.
Are you like? Good to know. It opened on my computer and I didn't even, anyway. I'm happy to answer the question. My name is Kelly and I'm with URI. And sort of our approach more or less to interfaith, we use this phrase, religions, spiritual expressions, and indigenous traditions, because it's really important to bring everyone to the table, like the previous speaker just said. And so there we go. Now I see myself. Sorry, guys. And so really, our sort of modality for doing interfaith is to bring people of different traditions to the table together and then encourage them to do something together, which I know is also very similar to IFYC's model, to really the idea of building bridges for social change work to be done. And we kind of talk about it as a two-pronged approach, which is that when that happens, we are building bridges among the faith traditions and people who are of no tradition on the grassroots level, and at the same time addressing social issues. And so we're getting two benefits from one action, which is building those cultures of understanding and peace and creating social change.
Thank you. So I'm going to be asking our panelists a series of questions throughout this webinar. And if anybody listening to the webinar would like to contribute or ask a question, you have the chat feature, which you can send to us. And there's also Q&A, so you can ask panelists a specific question, or you can ask all of the panelists, and we are going to work to address all of those questions. So my first question for you all is, what are some obstacles to interfaith work that you've encountered so far? So I think within the interfaith community, there are different issues that each of us have faced, and so I'd like to hear something that you or your organization has experienced and what you did to overcome that issue. And if I could call on Megan first to answer this question, that would be great.
Sure. So when I was first thinking about how I would answer this question, what are the obstacles around doing interfaith work? The first thing that came to my mind was time. So we work specifically within the context of higher education on college campuses. And the story that we often hear from both students and professionals is like, we're just over-programmed. There's so much going on in addition to classwork and class teaching responsibilities. There are a good number of folks who really want to be involved but just don't have the capacity. So I don't know if we have come up with a kind of across-the-board solution to that challenge. I think it's a challenge that a lot of campus organizers in general face. But one of the things that we often recommend is finding ways that you can get involved that might be a little bit less traditional. So maybe if you don't have time to do an event, you can think about, okay, well, can I be involved in the tweet chat? Can I do something digitally or remotely? Can I lend my voice in a way that will fit into my schedule and make sense for me? So I think the great thing about, or one of the great things about the interfaith movement is that there are different ways to come in and different ways of approaching it. So we've definitely encouraged people to think about what's going to work well for them and what's going to help them contribute, and also have a good balance and incorporate self-care in a way that will help them sustain their efforts and to avoid burnout.
Skylar, do you have any follow-up ideas of obstacles that you've faced or anything you wanted to talk about?
Absolutely. In Spokane, it's not exactly seen as a mecca of interfaith. We're a smaller regional town on the east side of Washington State, so in the upper left of the United States. And we're actually seeing some very deep challenges and deep-seated challenges. The Southern Poverty Law Center just came out with its report of hate groups, and 6 of them are in the area. Historically, they've been white supremacists, but we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitic groups in the area, as well as anti-Muslim groups. And so this is very concerning. When it comes to challenges that we face, not only do we face these threats and these groups that are undermining many of the community organizing work projects that we're doing, but I've run into, just as a millennial, the stereotype of what is interfaith. Many people think that it's just, a bunch of old hippies that are trying to levitate the Pentagon, and that's great. But I'm really interested in reclaiming that, not only as a movement, but also locally. The Interfaith Council of Spokane was integral about 20, 30 years ago in getting things moving, and since then it's stagnated. And so trying to come up with projects and new campaigns that reorient this idea of interfaith or multi-faith encounter is really, really important. And so what we tried to do is look at the next generation. The skill set that we have with social media, the tools that we have in community organizing can breathe new life into this old truth, this timeless truth of coming together to meeting our neighbors to build a better community and a better tomorrow. And so those are some of the challenges that we face, but I also see them as opportunities. Great ways of getting people involved and passing that baton is really, really exciting.
Thank you. That was a great answer. Sarah, do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, I would echo what Skylar and Megan said. Time is definitely a huge factor, especially for activists. People who are really passionate about their community find themselves really busy because there's a lot of work to be done. What came to my mind when I saw this question was a little bit different from what Megan and Skylar had said, which is, I think relationships is the biggest obstacle. You know, I've worked with a lot of interfaith groups, and you would think, you know, okay, where's the division going to come in? We've got people who are really different than each other, and we're going to have issues because the food is not kosher or it's not halal. No, it comes because someone looked at somebody funny, you know, that someone said something that came off harsh. It's relationship issues. And interfaith groups struggle with the same relationship issues that we have in our families, that we have in our workplaces. And so really building a strong bedrock and foundation of relationships among the people who are doing interfaith work together is so important. Because when you do get to those hard societal issues that you're working together to address, you need to know that you have one another's back. The other obstacle I was thinking of for folks who are newer wanting to get involved in interfaith is they'll sometimes get calls, you know, oh, we saw this thing, you know, online or a website or a video or something, and like, we want to do something, but that fear of where to start really gets in the way. And especially in our culture, like the fear of doing something wrong really can prevent people from actually taking that first step. And I think that's actually particularly in activist circles, right? We can be kind of judgy people. If you don't say the right words and know the terminology, we kind of look funny at you. So I think it's on us as activists to be a welcoming community, but also for folks who are interested in getting involved in interfaith, to not let that fear stop you, and to take that step anyway. And there are tons of resources out there, and I know that question's later on, but I'm happy to send a lot of links, you know, after the webinar via Kate, to help you feel more comfortable. And there are people who've done this work, like those of us who are sitting here and thousands of others who are willing to have a conversation to help get over that initial fear, which will probably come back in waves every new step that you take. But to not let the fear stop you, I guess, would be my second major point here.
Yeah, and to echo what Sari just said, I think that a big problem is figuring out which programs and events are best for your community, and also to begin with interfaith. So communities that are engaging in interfaith or are passionate about interfaith really vary, and so there isn't, you know, one set way to interact with the community or to begin this work. So I would like to ask our panelists now, and I'll start with Sari, what programs and events have been most effective for you, or if you have advice for different regions that have been more successful with certain events and programs.
Sure. And as you said, Kate, it depends on the community. So that would be like my baseline answer is know your community. What are the issues that you're facing? What's the history, the relationships between people, what's been tried before? As much of that as you can find out, the better. That being said, I'll give some examples of events that I've seen work really well in a couple of different settings. One is the Hands Around the Mosque or Hands Around the Synagogue or other house of worship, which is often done as a response. So in California, in Contra Costa County, which is about 45 minutes outside of San Francisco, depending on traffic, both following the San Bernardino shooting and following the first immigration ban, the Interfaith Council there organized an event where folks were invited to the mosque on Friday to stand outside hand in hand and to encircle the mosque as people prayed inside. And whether there's an actual threat, as we've seen some of our Jewish community centers get bomb threats, or whether it's simply that fear, right? That fear that something could happen. Those types of solidarity events are really powerful. And to get at something we're going to talk about a bit more later, how do you get to a wide audience? Those kind of events are very visual, and they often get media coverage as well, and they draw in people because it's kind of an easy bar to entry. I can show up and I can be at this place for an hour. So that's one thing that I've seen work really well. I would also say interfaith vigils. Again, it's another reactionary, often reactionary thing, but bringing together community leaders or lay leaders or faith leaders to pray together or meditate, or whatever their expression is of connection, to do that together in the same space can be really, really powerful. And then finally, I would just say dialogue, bringing people together to talk to each other. And some of the favorite ones that I've seen have been around food. So we all know that religious traditions each have some, unique dietary restrictions often. And so I've seen really cool dialogues that ask people from different faith traditions to bring a dish that is, within their dietary restrictions. That kind of forms the foundation for the dialogue, and then you can go deeper. But people, when they're eating together, are always be more likely to talk together. And I'll leave, I know Megan and Skylar, y'all have a lot of other ideas, so I'm excited to hear what you say.
Great, I'll jump in. So our context is a little bit different because we often are observing what other people are doing in terms of events that we've seen be successful. So I'll try to talk in two parts. I'll talk about what IFYC does and then some examples of what I've seen be really effective. So our two big programs that are really focused on individual leadership development are our national gatherings that we do called the Interfaith Leadership Institute. So we will be doing one of those a year, which will be like a huge gathering of as many people as want to come to be trained in the kind of skills and the knowledge that you need to be able to do programs on the ground and think about what's going to be right for your context. So that's a 3-day event. It usually involves a lot of different things. So you have a training track that you sign up for. So you go, and when I say you, I mean college students. So we train college students specifically, and then also we have tracks available for educators. And you go and you learn basically, how do you tell your story? How do you communicate why interfaith is important to you? And how do you leverage your story not only to come to know another person, but also to use it as a tactic for helping to build coalition around interfaith diversity specifically. So students are asked to think about their identity and the different parts of what make them who they are and how their religion and worldview influences that and is influenced by that. They get to practice telling their story, and then we move from that into, okay, how do you organize on campus? What kinds of issues do you choose to take on? They're going to bring as many people in as possible. And how do you communicate that interfaith work isn't about making it seem like we're all the same, like we're all very different, actually. So IFYC is a civic organization. We very much believe that you can have exclusive truth beliefs and also be involved in interfaith work. So helping students kind of balance out the dissonance there, because I think that can be something that's kind of hard to wrestle with, especially when you're in your late teens and early 20s. But students are really excited and eager to take on that challenge, and that's really encouraging to see. And also involved in those days is practice in coming to know people. So we do our big dialogue events. We call it Talk Better Together. There's an event that we do called Speed Faithing, which is basically like speed dating meets interfaith literacy. And we have resources online that you can download that will explain what's involved in those events. So that's kind of our premier program. And then we also have a newer program, which we're calling our Interfaith Leadership Labs, which are smaller regional gatherings that campuses are taking on the leadership for. They work with us kind of in partnership, but they're the ones who are really driving. And I think it's really exciting for us because we are stepping back and saying, people on the ground have the skills to do this, and we will provide resources and support, but this is really their show. So all that information is on our website, and I'll share that, of course, in the resources coming up at the end. And things on campus that go well are really dialogue-based. I would definitely echo what Sari said around how people really love to talk to each other. And I think in the the situation that we're sitting in now, and the conversation nationally about how we talk to people whose ideas we really don't jive with and don't really have a clear sense of how we connect to them, because all we're seeing is this one kind of issue that's at the very front of our consciousness. So taking the time to get to know one another around service and the values that we do share are things that I think people are looking for. And there's almost a sense of relief when that's offered to them. Like, oh, great, I can come together with people. We don't have to argue. Not that argument isn't important, but sometimes you just need to kind of be together. So those are the things that campuses are doing more and more of, are those events that are meant to come together to serve a particular need in their community, or to allow people to talk to one another and to get to know one another better.
And I can attest, as an IFYC alum and former Germanicos fellow, absolutely, there are so many wonderful resources. So you all should check out any and
Thanks, Skylar. I didn't tell him to say that, y'all. So just so you know.
It's definitely true. I've learned so much from the IFYC, and it actually is a great way of discussing some of the things that we're doing here in Spokane, things that we've seen that are working really, really well. So backing up a couple of years, when we found the Interfaith Council in this really much needed time, it was basically three people in the community, three angry hippies who were all upset, and they were meeting in a church basement, and they were all basically fighting over who touched the thermostat last. Like, that's where we were. And so it took a couple of millennials to come in, and if I could be so bold and say Frank Underwood, the board, and get it back to where it needs to be. We're a 501c3 nonprofit now. It's both federally and state compliant. It's a wonderful place to be. And one of the ways that we really put the interfaith work that we're doing on the map is by conducting a survey. I think Megan and Sari said this, and Kate as well, discussed this idea that you need to know the needs of your community to figure out how do you move forward and how do you make change and bring people together. So that's exactly what we did. And we found that many people, like Sari had mentioned, are afraid. There's this fear of not doing the correct thing. And that was getting in the way of getting different religious groups and multi-faith encounters off the ground. So people would drive by the beautiful cathedral or the synagogue that we have here in town and say, oh, it'd be lovely to go in sometime. I don't know anybody there, or I've never been in a synagogue before. So, maybe some other time. And we thought there's got to be a better way of getting people together. So kind of being a millennial, we Googled, are there resources out there? Is there a video that we can find on YouTube on how to visit local houses of worship? And there wasn't anything that met the needs. And of course, there's reasons for that, right? If you're visiting a mosque in Myanmar, it's a little bit different than, visiting one in California. So we decided to hyper-localize this approach. And we work with local groups in town. And we've started a campaign called Meet the Neighbors, which is really, really wonderful, working with the Know Your Neighbor campaign on a larger scale. And basically, we have a series of videos that you can Google. If you just type in Meet the Neighbors Spokane, you can literally learn a little bit on not only the history of different religious groups here in Spokane, but we'll also teach you how to visit our local mosque, our local synagogue, our local Hindu community. And so it's really, really exciting because we're seeing the hits go up and up and up, and we're seeing people use these resources on social media as well as an email. So if there's a PTA meeting at the Sikh temple, we're seeing that URL being embedded in these email strings, which is great. You've never been to the Sikh temple? We can teach you how to do that. And we feel like this is really important, to be proactive, to give people the resources, meet them where they are so they can watch in the comfort of their home if they're interested in this, or they can take the next step and put that into practice. And we also offer a series of open houses that kind of accompany the video rollout. So if we, at the beginning of the month, put out a new video, at the end of the month, we'll have an open house at that particular congregation or community. And then we ask people to just come in and share in great food, which is very, very important, because I always think with my stomach. And also a really wonderful time to have a really deep Q&A session. And that seems to be exactly what the Spokane community needs. And before we can love our neighbors, we need to meet them. And that's the foundational work that we're doing here in Spokane. We're also seeing on the reactive side, because there are so many different threats going on locally, we're crafting together what we're calling an emergency response unit. So I've been running around and meeting with the imam, the rabbis, the bishops of the area, and getting a commitment from them, and getting their cell phone numbers and saying, hey, if we hear of something going on, if our Sikh temple is attacked, if the synagogue is attacked for whatever reason, I want to, if I call you, you will show up. And a couple of months ago, when our Martin Luther King Center was attacked and some horrible graffiti was there, it was the Interfaith Council that helped come in, craft a press release, help be alongside the targeted group. And then we mobilized the faith community, the faith leaders, who were all basically trained with talking points on how to condemn hate, how to speak the language of their own group, and then bring people in to do service projects. So it's not enough to stand behind it's not enough to stand behind a pulpit. It's not enough to stand just behind a bank of cameras in the press. You need to act. And so then we offer trainings for the local community, because vigils are great. Sign waving is awesome. That's great. It's definitely a part of this movement and definitely a part of getting things done. But what happens when you go home? What happens the next day after the rally? We're really interested in that. And so we've also decided to launch a series of what we're calling Good Neighbor Conferences, where we provide people in the community workshops and trainings on how to be a better neighbor to your Muslim neighbor, how to combat Islamophobia, how to combat anti-Semitism. If you see a hate crime in the state of Washington, this is how it's defined. If you are a victim of it, here's the steps that you can take. Here's who you call to make sure that things go. And we brought in people from all across the state to be a part of it. And it seems to be working. We're training people actively, not just asking them to show up. And I think that's what really people are craving, as Sari had mentioned. People want to come in. So that's something that's really, really exciting on our end.
Thank you, Skylar. And what I really want to echo on Skylar saying is, first of all, the part of him with his Interfaith Council, a bunch of millennials coming in and shaping things and changing things. And I think obviously all of us are pretty young, and I think there's a new interest in interfaith, and that is bringing a lot of people to the forefront and trying to find ways to be involved with interfaith. But interfaith does seem to attract a certain audience, and sometimes interfaith can feel like you're preaching to the choir or preaching to people who are already passionate about what you're passionate about. So I wanted to ask our panelists, and we can start with Skylar if he doesn't mind, what they do to attract different audiences or people that are a little bit harder to get in contact with, and encourage them to engage in interfaith dialogue.
Well, a great way of doing that is meeting people where they're at. I know that I've had difficult conversations with other leaders in the community where they're not ready yet to sit down with different groups. They're not ready. They're not at that point. And I really feel like as a leader, instead of calling them out for this, I'd rather call them in. And so one of the ways that we do that is sitting down over a cup of coffee. The Pacific Northwest, we are seeing this amazing renaissance in coffee shops and coffee houses. And so I do a lot of my meetings, different places, and I just get to know them. I get to know their background and wait for them to discuss what gets them up in the morning. And oftentimes that's their family and their faith. And then we can relate that to our community. So we might be sitting in different pews on Sunday, or frankly in other places on the weekend. But what we can find common ground is that we love Spokane. We love this city, and we want to stand against hate. We want to empower people to come here. So it's a powerhouse for the Inland Empire, as we call it, on this side of the state. And we can find ways of doing that. So what, I ask questions all the time. What's going on? What troubles you? And would you believe it that, homelessness is a big deal, not just for Christian groups or evangelical groups, but actually the Sikh community is really interested in this as well. Would you be willing to do service projects together? And I'm sure Megan, she actually alluded to this earlier, but I feel, and this might be my IFYC training showing, there's a time definitely for dialogue, absolutely, but I'm finding that through service together, you can really make a difference, and people can come together, and those differences and those silos that we find ourselves in all the time when it comes to faith fade away when we're raking leaves for the local park, or handing out food at a local soup bank or a food bank. And it's really, really wonderful to see that come together, where people realize, oh my gosh, they want to serve others. They want to love their neighbors, and this is a part of their faith as well. And they're doing this because their faith is informed through these acts of service. And so that's something that's really powerful on our end, is just to have a servant's heart, be very meek and modest, be willing to call people in rather than call them out, and then try to find a thing that they're really passionate about, and speak that language and get them in a room with someone who they would not be with before, and they'll find common ground.
Megan, do you have anything that you'd like to follow up with?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to say things very similar to what Skylar said. So in terms of context, we work specifically in the higher education setting. So one of the things that I do when I want to call people into this work is, for lack of a better term, a lot of it is like code switching. So being able to speak the language of whoever it is that you're talking to. So if I'm speaking with, say, someone who's in religious life, a chaplain, or someone who's maybe an affiliated minister on a campus, like I'll use a different language than I will if I'm talking to a student affairs professional. I'm still saying the same things, but maybe using different terms. So for example, if I'm trying to entice a fellow secular person to get involved in interfaith work, sometimes I'll use the term worldview instead of religion, or I'll call it worldview engagement instead of interfaith cooperation. So communicating the same ideas, but making it clear that there are different perspectives present, and you don't have to be any faith, or you have to be any kind of faithful person to be involved. Everyone is welcome. And also, one of the things that I found to be very beneficial is to approach people through relationship. So a lot of times I'll notice that folks are thinking about groups of people, like how do we get the MSA involved? How do we get Hillel involved? And my question is, okay, who do you know on the MSA? Who do you know in Hillel? You think about individuals, people trust their friends more than they trust ads or folks who are maybe not as familiar. So thinking about the kind of smaller scale ways that you can approach folks and build trust, and really take a relational, almost community organizing kind of perspective on it. So I think, being cognizant of language. I really like Sari's point earlier about how language is imperfect and we shouldn't use it as a way to exclude people if they don't know the right things to say. I think those moments can be really valuable teaching moments instead of, maybe approaching it more from, oh, you should know what this means, or, oh, you don't know what that means. It's more, we use this term because there's a reason for it. Here's the story behind it. So it is a valuable experience for them, and not one that they maybe wouldn't volunteer for again if they feel kind of excluded in that way. So I really love talking about language and how to adjust it to make it more exclusive. And I think I'd also say that not having imperfect terms as an excuse not to do things. So I don't think we're ever going to come up with language that everybody can agree on, but we can get started and we can start working together in spite of that. So yeah, but approaching people through relationship, being cognizant of the words you're choosing and the language that you're using, those are kind of the big picture suggestions that I would make in terms of bringing people in.
Hi. I didn't hear you, but I'm assuming you passed to me. So you may have been muted for whatever reason. So yeah, I'm really going to echo what Megan and Skylar have said. And I'm going to add to it rather than repeating what they're going to say, what they've said, but I do agree with all of it. So I think one thing which they both touched on, but I want to emphasize a bit more, is listening. So how do you bring people in who aren't sure about you and your organization or what you're trying to do? Ask them questions and then listen to what they're saying, and just do that listening. I actually just had that experience today. I went into a meeting, somebody who didn't know our organization, and it started off on kind of a funny foot, and then I just started asking him questions about his organization and what they were doing, and it broke the walls down to just listen. And when people feel heard, then they're willing to hear you back. But if we can take that first step to listen to people. So I think how that translates into getting people involved is exactly what Megan and Skylar have said, which is find the people in communities that you want to engage with. So I work with interfaith organizers. URI has about 75 grassroots interfaith groups across the US and Canada that I'm in touch with regularly. And one of the big questions that they ask me is, you know, we've got just about everyone except the evangelicals. And I keep hearing that. And so I think there's a lot of deep digging there, and we could have an entire webinar and conversation on that question. But one thing I consistently encourage folks to think about when you're finding that situation is to ask yourself, are you creating a space where those people feel welcome? So yes, you have to build the relationships, and I think that's a really good first step. But then when you do take that step to invite them to your event, are they going to feel safe there? Are they going to feel welcome there? I think sometimes in interfaith circles, we use a lot of pluralistic language that indicates that all faith traditions lead to heaven, right? So that is language that evangelicals are not comfortable with. And if we put that language out there, so if we're doing an interfaith event and a person speaking says, and all of us, you know, we all know that we're just all on the same path. If an evangelical, and I can say this because I grew up in an evangelical tradition, hears that, they're going to think I'm an outsider here. This isn't my place. I'm not supposed to be here because I don't agree with these people. And so we need to learn how to frame our message so that that's fine, a fine thing to say in an interfaith setting, but you still need to say it as something that you believe, rather than making a statement of belief for everyone who's gathered there. And so I think not only on the evangelical issue, but on a lot of other issues, we need to remember kind of the basics of dialogue, even as we get deeper into it, which is speak for yourself. And I think that will go a long way in terms of creating a safe space where all people do feel welcome. The other thing is, you know, we talked about, Skylar mentioned, and Kate mentioned, you know, the dynamic that interfaith generally attracts. And by and large, interfaith engagement outside of colleges and universities is retirees. Because those of us in the middle, you know, have jobs, have kids, have all these things, and people find it hard to engage. But I would say, don't let that scare you. So if you're a millennial, or you're in between that college age and that retiring stage, and you're trying to figure out, like, is there a place for me in this organization? There are some really hard conversations that might have to happen, as I'm sure Skylar could give us some examples of. And that intergenerational work, as I talked about earlier, like a lot of the problems that come up in interfaith are often interpersonal, and intergenerational adds a dynamic to that. So whether it's young people not feeling respected or feeling like they're put in a box and oh, we're glad you're here because now you can do social media, and we're like, oh, we have so many more skills than that, please don't, you know, put me in that corner. And I see you guys laughing. So you know, people know how to, like, and for our colleagues who are older, who are not millennials, I'm sure there are things that we do that also put them in a box and make them feel marginalized. And so learning how to have those conversations and really have good open dialogue with one another. The chair of my board that I work really closely with, she and I have developed that relationship over time. And she is old enough to be my grandmother, but we have frank and honest conversations with each other because we've built that relationship. So I would just say, if you are thinking of engaging in interfaith and you're not sure if your sort of age is welcome there, to be cognizant of that, and then also reach out for help. I mean, I'm sure ISYC has some great resources. URI is also dedicated to seeing millennials and young people rise up into leadership in the interfaith movement. And so we would love to have conversations if there's something you're struggling with that we can maybe help you through on a more personalized basis.
So something that Sari, Skylar, and Megan have all touched on is the importance of vocabulary in interfaith, and the importance both as an obstacle and as something that is a tool. So I wanted to ask all of our panelists if there's a certain word that you would like to help define for our viewers in regards to interfaith that might be helpful. So even if it's the difference between interfaith and multi-faith, or pluralism, just a word that you think needs to be clarified or could be helpful if clarified for people engaging in interfaith.
I have one. This is Sari, and I would say the word interfaith. It can be a problematic word because it has the word faith in it, and I think by nature of that can feel exclusionary to people who don't use that language to define how they relate to the world. And so we use it because it's common and it's kind of the best thing that we have. But I would love to see, and this isn't so much a definition, but as a call to folks to wrestle with this question of, is there another word that we need to be using? But I would say, given that I think is the best word we have right now, I always, whenever I say it and say it to a new person, I try to add that element, which is, do interfaith work, which includes people of all faiths and no faith, or all traditions and no tradition, or, just to use the word we have, but also add that nuance that's missing from the word itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Sorry if I stole it.
I was actually going to talk about the word diversity. So that's something, especially coming from a higher ed background, I mean, diversity is one of the biggest values and the biggest things that is championed and celebrated and meant to be explored. But I do think there is a caveat that I would add that diversity doesn't necessarily mean something good. Having a diverse community can lead to conflict, can lead to struggle. So thinking about diversity is something that's more neutral and more like, okay, this is what we have to work with. What are we going to do with it? Instead of we have these different people, different diverse identities around the table, we're done. So thinking about it more as like a call to action, like saying, okay, this is what exists. And let's think about some ways we can move forward given all the differences that we hold. And we talk about that in terms of pluralism and like how pluralism relates to diversity. So pluralism itself also has a lot of definitions, but we talk about it as the positive engagement of diversity. So just really like challenging how we understand those terms and how we are willing to challenge them and challenge ourselves to think about them in more nuanced ways is definitely one that I would encourage.
I would just say ditto. Absolutely. I love the word pluralism, and I try to use that a lot. Wearing another hat, I do work at City Hall, and so I work with elected officials constantly who love to hollow out terms like diversity, who love to use words behind a podium, and we might not see necessarily action behind them. And that's something that's very difficult for me because I pride myself on being someone who is very authentic and searches out, actively seeks authenticity. And so when I don't see this, when I see a disconnect between action and thought and belief and word, it's like nails on a chalkboard to me. So I guess maybe along those lines, I'd like to talk about the word resistance because I think it kind of dovetails out of that. Here in Spokane, there are many people who are talking about resistance, and I think nationwide, to be totally blunt and to take this into another area. And I think it's important to stand up for what we believe. I think it's important to advocate for those who are voiceless, and I think it's important to resist things that are outside of our values. And of course, having a very deep and frank conversation in our community and communities about these values is indispensable to moving forward. But the word that I'm really interested in right now is resilience. I am not necessarily against anything, but what I am for is having a sustainable community here, regardless of whoever is in power, regardless of outside forces. I know that locally, Spokane is an amazing place. It is inherently diverse. It has been for 120 years now. And that's something that excites me. And so how I resist sometimes is maybe organically and from the grassroots level, trying to create a resilient community that will stand the test of time, that values pluralism, that understands the nuance between pluralism and diversity, where we can come together to find common ground through interfaith and multi-faith encounters. I think is really, really something that I'm trying to do, and I would encourage others to meditate on and ask. And that's a great conversation starter, frankly. What does your faith mean? How do you put that into practice? How can we find common ground? These are great ways of going back to the earlier question, meeting people where they're at, and maybe building something more resilient.
Thank you, Skylar. So now I would like our panelists to talk about any additional resources they might have or would like to point to that could help with interfaith. I know that they have highlighted a few that I will share with you after this webinar, but if there's any further resources that they think are important or useful.
Well, I mentioned our training opportunities earlier, so I won't repeat that. But if you're interested in checking out IFYC's website, we have some really great downloadable resources. You can download them free of charge. All we ask for is your email. And they cover a lot of different topics. They're focused on the college context specifically, but there's good learning that I think is translatable to a lot of different situations. So I definitely urge you to check that out. It's just ifyc.org/resources. And we're also launching a new endeavor I wanted to mention to all of you. It's an online magazine called Inter, I-N-T-E-R. And it's kind of like an online storytelling platform. And we really would love to have input from people who are doing interfaith work, who are approaching it from a variety of contexts. It really is a chance to tell stories of young people and also people who've been doing the work for a while now about what they've learned, what they've encountered. It's not necessarily something that has to be in a nice, completed, beautiful outcome, if you would, like the story could be ongoing, but really wanted to create a space where people can have more of that interactive kind of in-time live reporting out on the ground of how people are experiencing these things in the day-to-day. So we have a staff member who is fantastic, and she is the one who kind of gathers those stories and is our editor-in-chief, and there's information on the page about how to get in touch with her. So I'll include that link in the resources that I follow up with as well. And if you're on a college campus and you work directly with students and you have an idea for a program that you want to move forward, but maybe you don't have resources, we are offering a series of grants for the next year. We're calling them Interfaith Innovation Grants, and you can find also information about that on our website. So I'll include that link as well. Grants will be around $4,000 each, and they are meant to help you in thinking about how you're moving forward a campus initiative. So that's also something we wanted to offer to any of y'all who are working directly with college students. Yeah, so that's kind of my list, and all those are links and things that you can find online, and I'll be sure to provide those to Kate so she can provide them to you after the webinar.
Again, I'll provide direct links to some of these things, but URI has a really extensive library of resources on our website, which is uri.org. And we have things like the Interfaith Peace Building Guide that is several hundred pages long, and URI is a grassroots worldwide network, so they're going to have that lens to it as well, so not everything's going to be specifically focused here, which, depending on where you're watching from, might be good for you. The other thing we do is we have a webinar series, which if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get updates about that, and those are generally capacity building, just like this, resources for folks who are involved in interfaith work and want to develop a certain skill or have a conversation a little bit more deeply. The other thing URI is so we're a network of interfaith organizations, and I'll send the links to all of the actual paper resources you can get, but the other thing is human resources. So one thing that IFYC is and that URI is a network. And so just like you might join a professional network on LinkedIn or a teachers association or a professional network for whatever your career is, think of us as your interfaith network where you can come and have access to people who've been doing this work for a long time. Because let's face it, like sometimes you just want to speak to a human being who can tell you something and walk you through it and not read it in a handout. We need both, but sometimes people like me need conversation, verbal processors. And so cooperation circles within URI are defined as groups of people that are at least 7 people from at least 3 different religions, spiritual expressions, or indigenous traditions who've come together for a common cause. And so URI helps connect those groups with one another, with a worldwide movement, and to resources and capacity building, and sometimes in-person gatherings as well. And so if that's something that sounds like it would benefit your local interfaith work, I would love to connect you, and Kate can send out my email address. because that sometimes, like I said, just that in-person or via Skype connection is helpful.
I definitely encourage everybody to check out URI and the IFYC. They have amazing resources that we put into practice every day here in Spokane. Some of the things that we do, I would encourage everybody to check out if you're interested in looking at what localized interfaith work looks like. It's really, really interesting to have these resources available and to see if maybe they'll work in your hometown. And April, I'm looking at you over in Marysville. Maybe we should chat by Facebook. It'd be really cool to discuss what that looks like in the Pacific Northwest. That'd be really, really neat. Some other resources locally is definitely the Spokane Faith and Values, or FAVES as it's known. If you Google that, it'll definitely show what people are talking about in Spokane. It's kind of it's a different kind of website where people can come in and blog, posting every week, which is really, really great. Channels called like Ask a Jew or Ask a Muslim or Ask a Buddhist. And you can write in and ask questions in a localized context. So you get this perspective of what's it like to be from a particular faith background in Spokane. And that's really, really great because then you can actually have coffee with that person. Again, the coffee, right? And then move forward into action and all people around the table constantly. It's really great.
Thank you. And now I want to turn it over to Maha. Maha is the CEO of Islamic Networks Group, and she has a resource that she would like to share with you in regards to interfaith that we think could be helpful for you all.
Thank you so much, Kate. Can everyone hear me fine?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I also wanted, before I do that, I wanted to thank Skylar, Megan, and Sari for being with us today. I just heard the last few minutes and it's just been wonderful. And I'm looking forward to incorporating everything that you've said in what I'm about to share with all of you. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Not yet.
Okay.
There's a green share screen button on the bottom.
Okay. I thought share screen.
There we go.
Can you see it now?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So I wanted to let everyone know that ING has actually put together a training workshop on Interfaith 101 that is primarily focused toward Muslim audiences. And that is because we're getting calls all the time on a weekly basis from Muslim organizations that have asked us to help them to learn how to do interfaith work, to participate in interfaith work. They may not necessarily want to become speakers for all the other programs that we have, the Interfaith Speakers Bureau and the Islamic Speakers Bureau, but they just want to be involved in interfaith. So we put together this workshop, and the agenda looks as follows. We begin by defining what interfaith is. I completely agree with the person who said that maybe interfaith word is not a good word. Maybe we should use interreligious, we should use multi-faith. But here the intent is to just to define what it is and what it's not. Because I think people enter interfaith work with concern or trepidation or thinking that perhaps this is a vehicle for proselytizing or for being proselytized to. And so we begin with the definition. Then for a Muslim audience, it's really important to put it in context where we actually talk about Islam's theology of pluralism, and Islam has a rich theology of pluralism. We look at historical examples such as the Medina Constitution, then Muslims and Jews and Christians living together in Cordoba, Spain. We also look at modern examples where we look at the very specific document that Muslim scholars wrote to Christians at the time, and since then it's been expanded to also include Jews, called a Common Word document. And then we look here at perils of interfaith, we call it, or what to avoid and what to do if you're being asked a question about your religion that you don't know the answer of, and so forth. Then we move into talking about the purpose of interfaith today, the immediate, the long-term, and purposes of education, and then the types of interfaith work that people can participate in, from attending events at houses of worship to reaching out to our neighbors, to participating in interfaith service projects, to participating in mosque open houses, interfaith councils, and so forth. And of course, IFYC talked about a college campus interfaith, and this is something that we might want to incorporate here as well. And then here we provide tools for each type of interfaith work. And we're now building an extensive database of interfaith resources thanks to the folks that are part of KYN. And so we will include all of that for people to access. And then we'll have a workshop where Muslims specifically get to practice responses to frequently asked questions about Islam and Muslims. And this is extremely important because of the political environment of Muslims. It's no secret that Muslims are having to respond to some serious challenges. And one of those challenges, of course, is the issue of Islamophobia. And then this last part is one of my favorite, which is supplemental issues in interfaith. Which people always run into, addressing issues like, can you participate in interfaith rituals? Can I read scriptures? Can I kneel when Christians kneel? Can I bow in a Buddhist temple? Can I sing in Shabbat services, and so forth? All of those things that we found ourselves into and had to figure out on our own, and we then provide certification to encourage people to fully participate in these workshops, to be added to an interfaith volunteer listserv, and then for them to make a commitment that they will volunteer in future interfaith work. And so we're putting on our very first workshops in the San Francisco Bay Area, in the East Bay, and in the South Bay. And then what we're hoping to do with Kate's help is do what we're doing now, which is potentially doing a webinar to be able to expand this across the country, because we are getting requests from across the country, from 35 states, we just counted, for people that are seeking help in doing interfaith work and not really knowing where to begin. And I'd love to see this actually being done also in Christian communities, in Jewish communities, and Buddhist communities, to encourage more and more people to do interfaith work, and not just to constantly preach to the choir, people that are already engaged and involved in interfaith work. So thank you, Kate, for allowing me to present this.
Yeah, thank you, Maha. And we will be sending out information on this and all the other resources to you all shortly after the webinar. But I would like to begin to close out this webinar because we are running low on time, and I would ask our panelists if they have a brief statement on a challenge that they would ask somebody who is beginning to be involved in interfaith work. So what is something you would challenge someone passionate about interfaith but doesn't know where to begin? What would you challenge them to do?
I'll go first. So I'll start kind of, I don't know if it's high level or more like introspective level. I think in order to do interfaith work and to go into it in a way that is going to be life-giving for you personally, you really need to think about how comfortable are you in being uncomfortable. So I think one of the things that I often encounter, especially with younger folks, is this kind of aversion to being in a space where they're just not necessarily feeling like they know what they're doing all the time. I mean, there's such pressure around being perfect and always knowing what to say and always feeling like you got this. But sometimes you don't, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong or that you're doing anything wrong. To encounter the other, big O other, is difficult, but it's also very enriching. So if you're thinking about or you're interested in doing interfaith work, I mean, really sit down and think, okay, am I ready for this? Should I start small and then go into kind of bigger scale events or those kinds of things? And then if you decide yes, like I'm ready, like I would definitely encourage you to think about the resources that you already have available to you, both humans and also information that you can gather about maybe traditions that you've been curious about but don't know a lot about, and to reach out to the networks that we all represent, because we have people we can connect you with, information we can give you, so you can do what you need to do in order to feel like you're ready and that you're ready to really do the work, because it is obviously work that's needed and work that's really important to be doing.
Thanks, Megan. I love the emphasis on thinking first and looking inside of ourselves before we engage in this work. And in terms of actions, what really opened my eyes for the first time in my life to interfaith was going to somebody else's house of worship. And I would encourage you to do that. I know it might sound scary, it might be nerve-wracking, but I would encourage you to grab a friend, a family member, a spouse, and do it. If it makes you feel more comfortable, call ahead of time and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm from another religious tradition, I'm interested in learning more about how you worship. Would it be okay if I came in and attended one of your services? Would it be disruptive, or would I be welcome? And then you leave it on them to invite you in, and then you go and you be and you listen and you observe, and then you process afterwards with the person that you came with. The other easy thing is you live in a relatively sizable town, Google the name of your town, interfaith, and see what else is going on already, and reach out to whoever's there, and that way maybe you can start within a community of people and engage in the activities that they're doing, rather than feel like you have to start something yourself if you're not quite there yet.
Thank you. So I hope everybody who attended this webinar knows that there are plenty of resources out there for them to begin interfaith work, and obviously so many people who are passionate about helping them get that start. So I would like to challenge everybody who is passionate about interfaith to either join the Know Your Neighbor network, or to find ways to become involved, like watching these webinars, tuning in for future webinars, and looking into these different resources that are provided by different interfaith organizations. So I hope that this serves as a reminder that there are so many resources and opportunities out there for you all to become involved in interfaith work. And I hope that you share this video and share it with others who might be interested in starting interfaith work within their area. So I'd really like to thank our panelists for coming today and for spending time with us and sharing their resources and ideas, and also for those of you who took time out of their day to tune in and learn more about interfaith. Thank you all.
Thanks, Kate.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah.